So this has these little push tabs on the back here. Kind of hard to show you, I'm sorry. So he'll pull on this tab while lifting up. The one on this corner is kind of hard to reach, so might be best to use a screwdriver. This little cover has two tabs, just pull up one. So we're going to remove, let me back this up. We're going to remove these electrical clips, and then there's a bolt down there. That's why we loosen this box up. And then there's another one here. And then, let me see here. There's going to be one down here. Not this one holds the bracket, but that one there. And then you're going to also remove this from the bracket here. This one also has a little pull tab on it. I'll just set that aside. And there's one more over here too. So the electrical connectors, you're gonna push on this little tab that's right here, and then push this, and it'll pull it off. There we go. Same thing here. Push the little tab, and then pull on this. Sometimes you can work them free a little bit with this if they're kind of stuck. Let me put the camera down. At this point, just go ahead and loosen around here and loosen up your wires. You got a clip here. There's another one right here. Loosen that up, and then that should be it, I believe. Alright, and that can give us access to the motor mount, but we don't want to take the motor mount off yet. There's a couple things we want to do first. So at this time, go ahead and support the vehicle on jack stands or on a lift, however you're doing it. We need to get the crankshaft pulley broke loose before we take off this motor mount, before we move on. This is the one I was looking for. So if you pull this one here, that gives you a little bit more room too. So basically just trying to get everything up out of the way so we have access to everything, because everything we're going to be doing is going to be inside there. So I lifted the vehicle up really high so I'd be able to show you this better, but we're going to remove this crankshaft pulley bolt, and this can be very, very difficult to get off. I just did this timing job a few years ago, so I'm hoping maybe it hasn't tightened up like really bad, but there is a special tool that goes in here to hold the pulley, stop it from turning while you torque on this if you need to. So we'll see how this goes. Sometimes you can get it with a impact gun, but not usually. Most times you're going to have to pull out the tool, use a breaker bar, and usually a cheater bar with the breaker bar. They get really, really tight. They basically tighten up every time you start the vehicle, so they get very extremely tight. just so you know. Normally there's a cover right here. This one seems to be missing, and I'm gonna probably fix this a little bit when I put all this back together. And I'm also seeing a leak, so I'm gonna figure out where this leak is coming from too. Alright, so first thing I'm going to attempt is with my Ultra Torque, and then many people recommended that I use a 19mm weighted socket for these crankshaft pulleys. I've tried this thing 4 times on 4 different Hondas, and it has not worked for me yet. I'm hoping, since I just did this timing a few years ago, that maybe it'll work for me today. But if you're looking at getting one of these weighted sockets, basically a waste of money. Okay, so that worked for me, but again, I just did this timing about a few years ago, so there's no reason I should have been way over torqued. So, but again, I don't recommend these weighted sockets. They're a waste of money. 1 out of 5 Hondas, it's worked for me. Like I said, if that hadn't worked, you would use this special tool. It fits into the grooves in there, and then what I do is I put either a 1/2 mil or a 1/2 inch ratchet or a 1/2 inch breaker bar, and I'll set it up against the CV axle so it holds it there. And then you can use a breaker bar and an extension pole to break that bolt loose. Sometimes it can take a lot of force, but if you can't get it with an impact gun, that's how you're gonna have to do it. Most of the times you can't tap the ignition with this. It's usually way too tight. So all we wanted to do for the moment was just get this bolt loose. Right now it's loose. We're gonna go ahead and leave all that there. We're gonna put the vehicle back down so we can pull the engine mount, pull the belt, and then we'll get back into this stuff. So at this time, you're going to want to support the engine. I like to do it at the edge of the oil pan there, because we're going to end up putting a drip bucket right here for when we take the water pump off. It's going to spill coolant, so we're going to have a drip bucket here. So the further away from this edge of the oil pan that you can get it, the better. So I like to keep it over that way a little bit. That way I've got a little bit of room there. But get that supported, and we can pull off the motor mount. So these timing jobs are rather difficult to video. That's why I'm talking so much in this one. But I'm going to explain what I'm going to do here real quick, because camera angles doesn't work out very well. But for motor mount bolts, you've got 2 here, and when you go to remove these 2, you're going to notice that the engine starts lowering down. So you're going to need to adjust your jack to keep some pressure off of these bolts. You don't want to get them stuck or break them or anything like that. So lift them up a little bit, let the engine go down a little bit, put your jack up a little bit more so the bolts are, you know, up instead of flush, and then you'll be able to pull them out the rest of the way. But you've also got, for this part of the mount, you've also got 1 bolt down here. And then once you get that part off, there's 3 bolts on this mount. You've got 1 there. There's going to be 1 on the back side down there. Really hard for me to show. It's underneath this other mount too. And then 1 on the downside there. And before I forget, these are going to be 14s. The 3 lower ones on the mount are going to be 14s. And this one on the side of the mount is going to be an 18. I like to loosen the one on the side before I start pulling the other ones off. So the engine lowered down very slightly, so I'm going to adjust my jack just a little bit to lift it up very slightly. Good time to check your mount too. As you can see, this mount's pretty tore up, so I'll let the client know. Okay, so now we've opened up this area rather well. We'll be able to get to the timing cover and everything inside there. It's going to be tempting to try to pull this mount right now, but don't yet. You can't. You need to pull the covers first. So we're going to hit the tensioner right there, take the belt off, and then we'll remove the power steering pulley, and then we'll start getting these timing covers off. So for the tensioner, I use the extra long 14. That's got a swivel head on it, but you want to bring it towards the firewall. And it's usually rather tight. You just kind of work it off the power steering pump pulley and release. And then you can work the belt off. Always good to check the condition of your belt when you got it off. This one looks pretty good, so probably won't recommend it at this time. But if you're getting some cracking, or if it's really glazed on the top or anything like that, any signs of a bad wear, definitely replace it now. At this point, I'm going to remove the power steering pump pulley. There's a 12mm down here, and there's a 12mm over here. I believe they're 12mm. They might be 14mm. I'll put the right size in the video. But the reason I do that is just because it gives me a little more access. What I'll do is I'll pick it up and set it up here. It's not necessary though. There is a bolt that's right underneath it. I don't know if you can see that very well. I'm trying, I can't quite show you. So there's a bolt that's right there that goes into this mount. And that's another reason that I like to take it off. But you can actually access that bolt with a wrench. So if you don't want to remove the power steering pump pulley, it isn't really necessary. You can still get to the covers. But I like to anyway. Yeah, so you can just move the pump out of the way like that. Again, not really necessary, but it gives you more room to work with down here. Okay, so with that off, we're now going to need to remove the tensioner assembly. It's really hard for me to get a picture. There we go. So you're going to remove that 14mm down on the second pulley. And then there's a 12mm that is below it. It's either a 12 or a 10. I'll list the right size. I'm pretty sure it's a 12. Let's see if I can get you a picture of it. There it is, right there. So it's right above the crankshaft pulley, which we can go ahead and actually pull this off now. Usually these pull off pretty easily. Hang on. And that gives you better access to that 12 right there. So the 14 I like to get from up here with the same extended ratchet that I used for the tensioner. I won't take that completely out yet. We'll pull the 12 and then we'll take it out and lift it up at the same time. So this one's going to be hard for me to film, of course, but I've got a very short extension and a 12mm deep socket. And you just get on that bolt right there and just go ahead and pull that bolt out. Okay, once you got that, you can pull that bottom 14 and then just lift that whole thing up through the top. Alright, I probably won't film a lot of this, but now you just want to follow the perimeter of the timing covers and get all the bolts off. Like there's going to be one there, one on the back side there, and then one on the below side, and then there's one inside this little hole right here too. Same on both covers, so there's going to be 5 on each of these covers, and then just go along the perimeter of the bottom one too and pull all those. Those are all 10mm bolts. And then you're also going to want to pull this one, which is this little plastic mount right here. Go ahead and pull the bolt for that, because once we get the covers off, we'll take this mount out. Okay, so with those 2 covers off, gives you a little better view of what's going on. Again, we still can't pull this mount yet, because we got to pull this timing cover first, the lower cover, and then don't forget about this bolt here. The lower cover, it's going to be really difficult for me to film any of that, but you get the idea. Go around the perimeter, you got a bolt there, there's another one in that area, and then one right up by the top. And then when you go to get, there's a bolt that's right here. Make sure you're getting the bolt on the timing cover and not the 10mm tensioner bolt. Be very careful about that, because if you loosen this tensioner right now, the timing's not set, so that's going to give you a really big problem. So, because we're not on top dead center right now, so do not loosen that bolt. Make sure you're pulling the one on the timing cover. Okay, so once you got all those out, and then don't forget that there's 2 inside the timing cover, right above the crankshaft pulley there, right below the motor mount, and then right on the side here too. So timing cover you can just pull down and out. And now we've opened up our timing. We need to pull that motor mount, and then we'll put this on top dead center. You go ahead and pull this ring out right now too. So let me show you that lower cover a little bit. You can see there's 2 on the bottom, one there, one on this side, and then you've got these 2 that are kind of inside the cover. So again, a lot of this stuff is hard for me to video. I do apologize. That's why I'm doing so much talking in this one. But there's 14mm bolts. You're gonna have one in this hole right here, one right here, and then there's one down below. Kind of hard to show that one. Maybe I can show it from on the underside here. So there's one right there on the bottom. Just gonna work those out and then lift the mount out. For these, I like to do up top here. I'll just use a short 14mm socket. You might need a breaker bar. I'm gonna pull it up. That's loud enough. Just maneuver it out. There you go. Okay, at this time we've got full access to the timing. We're gonna line this up to top dead center. So there will be some marks along the camshaft pulleys, and both of them, and then there's going to be a mark on the crankshaft pulley. There it is. I don't know if you guys can see that when we zoom in. So you see that little arrow right there? There's a little arrow mark on the tooth of this crankshaft pulley here. It also seems to line up with the key, but And that is going to align to that little arrow right there. So you're going to align that with that arrow, and then we're going to check the camshaft pulleys and make sure that their marks are where they need to be too, because for one rotation, or every 2 rotations on the crankshaft pulley is only 1 rotation on the camshaft pulleys. So we need to make sure that they're all in the right direction. If your key is missing at this point in time, if it pulled out with the crankshaft pulley, make sure you slip your key back in there before you adjust this, because you don't want that to slip. So mine came out with my crankshaft pulley. This is your little key here. So you want to slip that in there and keep that locked. That way nothing slips out of place. But make sure that stays in there. So we're just going to temporarily put the bolt back in for now so we can turn this. You should be able to turn it by hand. If you can't, then there's probably a problem with the engine, and I don't think it would be your timing. But give me just a sec here. So this is going to be hard for me to film too, but with your 19mm socket and wrench, you're going to turn this until that arrow that was on the tooth that I showed you is lined up with the arrow up there, and then we'll check the top camshaft pulleys. Alright, so make sure you're turning slow. You don't want to overshoot it, because you don't want to go backwards. You want to only go clockwise. Don't go counterclockwise. So once you get that, come on, focus. Okay, so we've got that dot lined right up with that arrow there. So they're both facing each other. See that? It's kind of hard to see, but it's not the notch on the tuning ring. As you can see, it's the notch on the pulley. So it lines up right with that arrow there. And then you're going to come up top and look at your camshafts. You're going to look for the notch that's right here. It's kind of hard to see and my camera's not focused, and there it goes. So there's a notch right there. You see that notch? And if you follow that tooth all the way back, it lines up with that notch there. And it's going to be the same on this other one. There's a notch right there, and if you follow that tooth back all the way, it lines up with the notch on the cover there. So it's exactly where you want to be. And what I'll do right now, I personally like to make marks, and I do what's called counting teeth. I'll count the teeth in the old belt and transfer my marks, count the teeth on the new belt and transfer my marks there. I'll show you that as well. But what I'm gonna do is I'll make a mark. I'll just draw a line from that mark to that mark, and then I'll draw a line here from that mark to that mark. And then down here, because you can't line it up to that arrow, I will make a mark usually at the 6 o'clock tooth here. So I'll make a mark on that tooth, and then I'll make a mark on the belt right there. And that way I know where the belt lines up when I put it back on. Okay, so as you can see, and I do a different mark on each one. That way if I get the belt mixed up or anything, I know exactly which way it goes. So I made a mark on that tooth, and we marked it all the way across, lines right up. Made a mark on that camshaft there, and then I marked both spots there. That way I can follow that tooth over. And then down here, like I said, I do a mark on the bottom. So I've got my mark there and there. And as long as you keep everything lined up, you're not going to have any problems. If you miss a line, anything, then nothing should move on you once it's on top dead center. We're going to remove the tensioner now, and none of these should move because we're on top dead center. So they should all stay in place. If they do move, it'll be very slightly, and you can just move it back with a wrench. So it's going to be really hard to video this too, of course, but here's your tensioner. I wish this thing would focus better. There we go. You've got two 10mm bolts here. I like to hold the tensioner down while I take these bolts off because it will spring back on you. So just kind of hold it down while you take these two 10mm bolts off, and then we're going to pull that tensioner out, and it's going to loosen the whole timing system up. So but don't worry, as long as you're on top dead center as I showed you, you shouldn't have any issues. Okay, once you have that tensioner out, you're going to notice now that the timing belt is loose down here, and you can go ahead and start working it off. Just kind of work it around, pulling it off little by little. And I like to try to keep it in the right direction and everything, that way I don't mess my marks up in any way. And just pull it off the bottom one there. If it's giving you a hard time pulling off on the bottom, you can remove these two 10mm bolts that are here to remove this shield, but usually you can slip it on and off. Just kind of work it a little bit, see, like that. So I like to keep, once I get it pulled off, I like to keep it in order, that being the crankshaft pulley mark. That way I know that that one faces outside, and then I know which mark for each camshaft is which. So as long as you got your crankshaft pulley mark facing outside, your belt's in the right direction. Now at this time, you can go ahead and remove this 14mm bolt right here, and that's going to remove this whole tensioner pulley right here, because we're going to be replacing that. A new one will come in the kit. If your kit doesn't have one, you still need to remove this to be able to get the water pump off. So either way it goes, go ahead and pull this 14mm bolt, and then there's going to be another pulley down here. Sorry, I can't show too well. That's also a 14mm. That's the idler pulley. You're going to go ahead and pull that one off as well. And yes, you do need to pull that one off even to get the water pump off, so you need to make sure that one comes off too. So at this time, go ahead and pull these two, and then we'll start working on the water pump. Alright, once you get those pulleys off, go ahead and situate a bucket underneath. Again, this is why I had you put the jack so far back, because now when the coolant drops down, it's going to land in the bucket instead of all over the floor. You can drain the system from the radiator and do it that way, but I figure I'm pulling off the water pump, so what's the point? Anything that drips down, I'm going to clean up anyway. There's no, the timing belt's not on, there's nothing that's the coolant's going to affect. So once you're done pulling the water pump and the coolant drips out, clean it up with some parts cleaner, and you'll be good to go. So at this point in time, there's three 10mm bolts on this side of the water pump. You've got one right there, there's one right there, and then there's one right there. And on this side of the water pump, you've got two. There's one right there, and there's one right there. Go ahead and pull those out. That's all the bolts that are holding this on, because the mount holds the rest of it on. And the pump might be stuck when you get to that point. So what I do is I'll take a hammer and I'll just tap on the pulley here, and it'll work itself out. Don't hit it. Just tap a few times and it'll start coming out. Okay, so I've got the two bolts on that side, two bolts on that side, and this one's loose. I left it in because, like I said, the pump's stuck. So I'm going to use a hammer to kind of tap it out. That way this will hold it there and it won't just fall down. But I just kind of like to give it a few taps. And you'll see it's starting to leak coolant. So make sure you're catching your coolant. Try to catch as much as you can, of course. And at that point, you should be able to wiggle it loose. So you'll just pull it out with that last bolt there. All these 10mm are the same size, so you don't need to worry about sizing them up. At this point in time, you should have all the belt and all the components pulled off their respective bolts. Hang on to those, make sure you keep those in place. Again, we're counting teeth on the belt, so I'll show you how to do that. But so you've got the water pump, the tensioner pulley, the idler pulley, and the tensioner. All that, depending on which kit you get, all that should come with the new kit. Depending on the kit you get, you're going to be looking at something like this. You've got your new timing belt, you've got the new tensioner pulley, and then this also has a shim that's going to sit behind it when you put it back in. You might have one on the car that you pulled out too. Mine does. You're going to have your idler pulley, you're going to have your new tensioner assembly, and then you're going to have your new water pump. We'll go ahead and start with the water pump, get that set in, and then get that cleaned up. That way it's got a little bit of dry time before we set the rest of the stuff in. On the belt, what I mean by counting teeth, so I know this is my crankshaft pulley because it's the one that's facing the outside. So I will count from the next tooth over, and I will count each individual tooth all the way up to my first crankshaft line, which will be this one. And then I'll mark that on the new belt, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll start again on the crankshaft, mark, I'll count that pulley, or that I'll count each individual tooth all the way up until I get to my other camshaft, mark, and then I'll transfer those marks onto the new belt. Just make sure, if you're counting, it doesn't hurt to take an extra minute to double count. Just make sure that your lines are marked up. This is gonna really help with having any alignment issues once you get the belt on. So your water pump gasket sits along some grooves in there, and there's a couple points where it kind of holds it down, but that doesn't always work. So when you're putting this in, just make sure you keep track of that. Once you got that torque down, just give it a spin. Make sure it's not clunking or anything like that, grinding anything. Alright, so we're going to install the tensioner pulley now. This is the old one, so you pull the bolt out of that one, and then inside there's going to be this little disc. So you're going to pull this out, and I like to clean this up. I like to get it nice and clean, because when you put it in the new one, this has to be able to move all the time. So if you got any kind of stickiness or anything to that, it could interfere with it. So go ahead and pull that out, clean it up, and then on the new pulley, you're going to install it to the back side of it like so, and then the bolt will go through this way. Okay, so with your new tensioner pulley, it's going to attach to that part of the water pump right there. You see that little threaded part that's sticking out there. Really hard for me to video this, but I want you to see where it is. So that's where the tensioner pulley goes, and then the idler pulley is going to go, sorry you guys, it's going to go right in that area there. Kind of hard for me to see. There it is. Can you see that? Right there. So this one will go over here. Once you have the idler pulley torqued down, make sure you give it a wiggle. It should move. If it doesn't move, you need to loosen it back up and retorque it. It should have free movement all the time. Next, we're going to do the idler pulley, which goes in this one right here. Sorry, really hard to show you guys. You'll see it though. With the idler pulley, there's a little spacer that goes behind it. So here's the old idler pulley. On the back side, you can see that there was a little spacer. The timing kits come with these. It's not on the original one, so you might not have one depending on how many miles the car has on it, but you are going to add that in to the new one. So when you put the new one together, you'll put the bolt through here, and then just go ahead and slip this over. When you're bolting this in, the tab is just going to go on the bottom like that, and just let it free hang, and that'll be a perfect position for it. So, and at this time with the idler pulley, book says at this point in time you want to just kind of finger tighten it in there. You don't want to tighten it all the way up. You want it to have movement. It's going to help with installation of the belt. So at this point in time with the idler pulley, I've just got it basically threaded in there, and you can see the pulley still moves. That's going to give you a little more room to work with the belt when you're installing the belt, so to make it a little easier. And then once you got the belt installed, then we'll torque that down. So at this time you're going to go ahead and install the belt. I like to start on the bottom pulley, and then I'll work my way up from there. Just make sure you're matching all your lines. I'll show you how it's routed in just a minute. Start with the left side camshaft, because that one's the hardest one to put on. It's got a lip to it. That's one of the reasons we leave that idler pulley loose too, as it gives you more room to work with on this side. And even still, you might have a hard time. Alright, so once you have it wrapped around, make sure all your marks are lined up there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just pull it right over the idler pulley. That's why the idler pulley is left loose. But make sure all your marks stay lined up. I do have these couple little clips that I use just to kind of hold the belt in place there. But yeah, so just get it routed, make sure all your marks are lined up, and then we'll pull it over that idler pulley. Alright, before we torque up that idler pulley, again, just check all your marks, make sure they're all lined up. Then you can torque the idler pulley. You're going to need to start with a ratchet and a 14mm just to kind of get it tightened up a little bit. Okay, I'll go ahead and remove my little clamp at this time. Don't move anything now, because now you've got all your marks online, you got them right where you need to be. Now we're going to install the tensioner. So at this point in time, you really don't want to play with anything here. You don't want anything to get out of whack. So here's what your new tensioner looks like. You've got your two old bolts, of course. These are 10mm. You've got a pin in the tensioner that is holding it from shooting out. Do not remove this pin until you have the tensioner in, torqued, and you're absolutely sure that all your marks are still lined up. You do not want to remove this pin until you're basically finished with everything that you're going to do in the timing. This is going to be really hard to video. I won't be able to video it, but I'll give you the torque specs on it. Just get this in place for the time being, and then I'll show you when to pull the pin. Once you've got your tensioner in place, you'll go ahead and torque your two bolts. These are a really light torque, so if you're a person that doesn't use torque wrench, don't over tighten these. The last thing you want these to do is break on you, because if those bolts break and that timing tensioner comes loose, you're going to pretty much destroy your engine. So torque specs are very important. I do recommend using torque sticks all the time, but I'll list the torque spec on these two bolts for you. But get these torqued up at this point in time. Still do not pull that pin yet. With your tensioner torqued down, double check all your marks. Make sure nothing moved on you. Should be good to go. And now you can go ahead and pull the pin on the tensioner. Sometimes it can be rather difficult. You may need to use pliers or something, but pull that out, and what that does is it tightens up the belt over here, so all your belts should be nice and tight now. Should feel good. What we're gonna do is turn the crankshaft pulley, or we're gonna turn the crankshaft twice. That'll put one full rotation on each of the camshafts, and then we're gonna double check our marks and make sure all of them line up. Now the marks that you put on the belt, they're not gonna line up. Don't worry about that. Those marks aren't important anymore. What's gonna be important is the mark on the camshaft and the mark on the backing plate. The mark on the camshaft and the mark on the backing plate. And then also your two arrows down here. So you've got the arrow on the tooth and the arrow right there. So we're gonna turn this twice and line that arrow back up onto the tooth, or line those two arrows back up together, and then we'll check our camshaft marks. What I mean by turn this twice is you're going to take that arrow all the way around once, all the way around twice. Alright, so I've got that turned twice, got the arrows lined up again. So now what we're going to do is we're going to check up here, and we should have that mark and the mark on the backing plate should line up. That mark and the mark on the backing plate should line up. If those three marks do not line up, if your arrows down there aren't lined up, if your mark here isn't lined up, if your mark here isn't lined up, then the timing's off. Say if this one's moved over just a notch or two maybe, your timing's off and you'll need to redo the whole setting of the timing belt. So you want it to where you can turn that crankshaft pulley twice and all three of your marks line up. The arrows line up, your mark there and the mark on the backing plate, your mark there and the mark on the backing plate. We'll make sure all those line up. If not, your timing's off and you need to redo it. With your confident that your timing is lined up, go ahead and pull this bolt back out. Make sure your key, that little piece of metal, is still there. And then we'll just go ahead and put this ring back on. Now with this ring, you want to make sure that the lip is on the outside. You can kind of feel a curve in there. You want to make sure it's pointed up to the outside. I hope that makes sense. Just go ahead and drop that back in, and then we'll put the mount in first, and then we'll start putting the timing covers back on. The bottom one I usually go underneath. Make sure you get that little 10mm bolt that goes on top of the mount, and then go ahead and reinstall your timing covers. I won't video that because it's just kind of wasting time. You really can't see what I'm doing, but for the bottom timing cover, come up from underneath, and then the top two covers you'll be able to get from right here. And now you got your timing covers on. Everything's looking good. We'll go ahead and install the serpentine belt tensioner next. This one can be rather difficult to get started because you're kind of going at it blindly. Just get it down in there and kind of feel around. You might even set it there and go from underneath to get a better view. Once you finally get that started, go ahead and put the 12mm bolt on the bottom of it before you torque it down. It makes it a little bit easier. Yeah, once you got that on, go ahead and put your crankshaft pulley on. The crankshaft pulley, in order to torque it, you're going to need the special tool. It costs for 47 foot-pounds plus 60 degrees after the 47 foot-pounds. If you don't have the special tool, you're not going to be able to torque it properly. And in that case, I recommend using the impact gun, getting it on kind of tight. Just be careful. Definitely not something that you want to strip or mess up in any way. So I'll show you what I do. Just make sure that that's all the way on solid. You don't really want to try to take it down with your bolt. That's not a good idea. It's a good way to strip the bolt, a good way to strip the threads in the crankshaft. And if you do that, then you're definitely in some big trouble. So I've got a impact gun. Probably just give it a few torques, and I should do the trick. Again, if you're, which I actually probably will retorque this, but just showing you what to do if you don't have the special tool. I will link the special tool in the description, by the way, but I'm going to go ahead and set that up now and torque this. But you'll torque this bolt to 47 foot-pounds, and then you'll make a mark on the bolt, and you'll bring that mark about 60 degrees over. So that's 47 foot-pounds plus 60 degrees. From the 12 o'clock position to the 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock position is 90 degrees. So from the 12 o'clock position to about the 2 o'clock position is going to be 60 degrees. Should be looking about like this now. We've got the serpentine belt tensioner assembly in. We've got the crankshaft pulley on. All the timing covers are on. The mounts halfway in. So at this point in time, we go ahead and put the power steering pump back in place. Before I do that, I'm going to take a quick coffee break, and we'll get right back on that. Now we can go ahead and wrap the serpentine belt. Again, give your belt a good look over. If it's got some cracks, if it's really glazed, if it's looking pretty old, brittle, go ahead and replace it. Now's the best time. If you replace it now, chances are it'll probably last the whole timing belt too. So you just change it every timing belt, basically. I'll give you the routing diagram in just a second. Okay, here's your routing diagram for your belt. I'll do the power steering pump pulley last. So that's your crankshaft pulley, that's your AC, that's part of the tensioner assembly, idler pulley, that's your alternator, that's your power steering, and that's your tensioner. So I'll do the power steering last. We'll push on the tensioner and wrap the power steering around. Sometimes this gets kind of tight, so a breaker bar can definitely help. I've got my 14mm extended ratchet down there, and then I'll just pull in that, wrap it around the power steering pump. Should do it. You want to make sure everything is in the grooves on each pulley and on track. So looks good. Alright, so talked to the client about this mount. We're not going to put this one back in. That one is absolutely shot. He did give me a new one, so we're going to go with this one. And there is one part on the old mount that I'll need to transfer over. So on this mount, it's got this little part here and then the two clips. So I'll need to transfer these over to the new mount. So if you're doing the mount and you're transferring this over, this part is going to go towards the engine, and then this part will sit on the side. When you're putting this one in, I like to kind of line up the holes a little bit, but I will start with the middle bolt first. So I get the middle bolt kind of started first. You don't want to tighten it up yet though. Okay, so just get that loosely started and then work your other two bolts in. You might need to adjust your jack a little bit as you do these top two bolts. I think I'm gonna need to a little bit. It's best to hand start these. You don't want to use a electric gun and cross thread them. This way you can feel what they're doing. Okay, then go around and connect your wiring harnesses. Alright, so on that mount, the rubber part points towards the engine. It's got a little locker on the end of it right here that locks into the mount. So make sure you got all your little wire and harness parts put back into place. Okay, and then we can start putting all this stuff back together. So for this one, you can actually set the bolt in there and just kind of slide it up on there. That's why it's got that spot. That way, because you're not going to be able to reach back here once you've got it in. So it's best to get that started just a little bit, and then you can slide that in. It's best not to tighten any of these up until you get them all in place. Okay, once you got them all started, you go ahead and tighten them all up. Okay, I'm gonna slide this back on its tab, push this in. That won't go all the way in until you start sliding this back. That tab will take it the rest of the way in. Same with this one. It kind of locks it into place, see? Okay, and you can get your power steering reservoir back in. And then bring your coolant reservoir over. Slip that back into place. Sorry for my camera view, it's kind of hard to video this, but make sure all your wires are out of the way of everything around here. And then we can go ahead and get this box secured up. Yeah, you should have everything back together at this point. And we need to burp the coolant, and we should be good to go. Normally before filling the coolant, I would go ahead and put the if you have that shield, you would put that shield on, put the wheel on, torque it down. The torque on the wheel is 80 foot-pounds. Normally I would do that, lower it off the jack, and then burp the coolant, but I don't know if you guys remember me seeing that leak. I'm gonna end up doing the oil filter housing gasket, so I'm gonna leave the wheel off for now, but I just wanted to let you know, so don't forget to torque the wheel. And at this point in time, we'll go ahead and fill and burp the coolant. Good time to inspect your radiator cap too. This one isn't looking too well. I think I'll have him pick up another one. His fan's been kicking on a lot, and I think this might be the reason why. I think it might be losing pressure. But that should be good enough for me to do the burping. So go ahead and top off your radiator at this point in time. That does not mean that the system is full. That just means that the radiator is topped off. You still need to burp it to get all the air pockets out of it. So burping the coolant is kind of a lengthy process. There's plenty of videos you can find on how to do this. Really rather simple to do. It just takes a lot of time. So I'm going to go ahead and burp this coolant. But as you can tell, timing's on point. Vehicle's running great. We're good to go. All you got to do left now is just burp the coolant and put your engine covers back on. While you're burping the coolant, it's a really good idea to just pop your head under the car every now and then, make sure the water pump's not leaking, make sure there's no leaks of any kind. Besides that, you should be good. So as I was saying, good time to replace your radiator cap. Like the old one was missing this plug right here, so I was losing pressure and losing coolant.